Depression is a fickle thing. It creates an alternate reality that hinders your well-being and enthusiasm, which can be a problem for a creative like myself. I've been struggling with anxiety and depression for well over a decade now, at least since my time in high school. From trying to be social living in a separate town, to jobs screwing me over left and right, even being fired from my housekeeping job for using the wrong vacuum, that's a wacky story. And even with my time online, trying to create meaningful content while trying to keep up with friends and family. Over time, my own mental health would continue straining, especially in 2019 with several deaths breaking me down, almost to a point where I actually considered taking my own life. Thankfully, I had the strength to overcome that, but the thought does creep up every once in a while, even after seeking therapy late last year. I'd say it's gotten better, though I doubt I'd ever get over being anxious and depressed all the time, especially with everything going on in the world nowadays. Which is why I've always wanted to really get a deep dive into the subject on this channel, in some form or fashion. While studies do show that video games can have a positive impact on mental health, I can also say that making games that tackle the ideas of anxiety, depression, grief, etc. are also a great way to teach people who don't have these experiences about the struggles people can have with them. And there is one game that made people realize just how effective that can truly be. At least for me. Celeste released way back in early 2018, and many people adored and praised this game to hell and back, including myself. I made a video about it at the time, and I regret that it wasn't as in-depth as I wanted it to be. It's also one of my earlier videos, meaning you have to hear my lackluster voice and semi-frequent stutters. But I did love the intricate level design, the smooth platforming, the calming chiptunes, the simple yet charming Commodore-esque style, to put it in some way. And of course, the touching story with the main girl Madeline, who wants to climb Celeste Mountain to find some kind of challenge in her life. And later on, you do see her emotional side, getting panic attacks throughout the journey, even having her worries being manifested into this dark version of her. She begins to doubt her abilities, thinking that everyone will think less of her, and even thinking that people around her do think less of her, even if it's all completely unwarranted. And it's all shown thanks to the people you meet along the trail. Hell, that gondola scene is still the highlight of the game, with the startled Madeline being comforted by her new friend Theo, teaching her a breathing technique passed down by his late grandfather. I still feel for Madeline and her mental struggles, balanced feelings of being neglected, and Theo's problems of imposter syndrome and the pressures of captivating his fans online. That fucking hits now more than ever. And even 4 years afterward, I still play this game, either to relive the story, getting every strawberry, beating every B and C side tape, which is just as hard as you can imagine. And I even learned about these lovely golden strawberries, and oh my god, welcome to my new distressing hobby till the end of time. This has grown to become one of my favorite games, even with that irritating Chapter 9 DLC. Sorry to tell you, but the fact that the new move is called wave dashing does not exude confidence. And yeah, it sucks to pull off, I hate it. But it has such a wonderful ending, with Madeline getting some kind of closure with Granny, and also giving us some hints that she's actually transgender, which is absolutely awesome. Come to think of it, they actually changed the credits as well as the company name because the main designer, Maddie Thompson, is actually transgender themselves. Hashtag trans rights or human rights, hashtag you bigoted fuckwits. But yeah, this game is just wonderful, and if you still have not experienced it, then I heavily implore you to do so. It is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned.
And it got me thinking about other games that use this theme to maybe enhance the story, the gameplay, the aesthetics, to make the overall package more timeless and engaging to people who actually want to know about this kind of subject. And I'm only going to be talking about the indie games for this video. There are other games like the Final Fantasy games as well as Silent Hill 2, but I think the indie scene really does highlight a lot of interesting ideas that the AAA scene just doesn't really have a lot of interest in. So without further ado, let's start with a game that may have actually started the mental health themed indie market. Depression Quest.
First complaint though, could you really not find a better name for this? This has as much subtlety as the need to the nether regions. Mixed reception is never the best sign, and reading some of these comments, I'm not expecting an intricate story of someone living through depression, more so a narrative that spoon-feeds you every aspect of the condition. So looking through to learn about the game, I find articles about the Gamergate situation, and apparently the director, Zoe Quinn, was one of the targets of it. I've read through a lot of articles about it, and I honestly have no idea what the hell happened here. All I've learned is that people are assholes on the internet, which is not exactly a new revelation. And with that said, I'm not going to make a stance on the whole situation, and really, it's not the point of the video anyway. You know, by the title, I was expecting it to be some kind of RPG, but instead they made a text-adventure game that has the most irritating version of Avrigina Cerebellum I have ever heard in my entire life. I assume the gradually on and off buzzing was supposed to invoke the mental turmoil of our nameless protagonist, I guess you can call him that. I don't know, the sound was just starting to get on my nerves. Thankfully you can turn that off, but that gives it its own problem, or it might make it more tolerable, depends on how you see it. And I say tolerable because the game, by design, is not supposed to be a fun time. I get it, depression isn't fun, so it only makes sense to make sure the game isn't. Let me be completely clear here. This game came out in 2014. There were plenty of movies beforehand that covered the subject perfectly while not sacrificing the enjoyability. World's Greatest Dad and Little Miss Sunshine to come to mind. But okay, if you want a more serious take, at the very least, you'll need to keep it engaging. And to give some decent credit, I did get hooked by the 15-minute mark. And I like the addition of locking certain options that would make sense for a typical person, but are completely off the table for people who don't want to bother finding help or even open up about what may be considered selfish or intrusive. But it also makes those times where there's only one option kind of lopsided, but that's a double-edged sword, I suppose. And after a slow start and getting used to how this person lives and get the ability to start making decisions, you can get a sense of how someone's life with depression really does work. By the end of it, though, it feels a bit awkward and rather baffling at points. With my pathway, I felt I was doing something right with my girlfriend, Alex, finally telling her about your condition, and she does agree to help out, though later she asks about our relationship, and I feel like I was in a dead end, despite choosing every positive outcome, or so I thought. I feel a lot of the options are complete traps, like this moment where you talk to an online friend about finding a therapist, only for the only option to be throw the note out, despite not knowing what I did beforehand, if anything. Maybe this one moment with a childhood friend locked things out. I did misread that as her hands, I think. Actually, I decided to do another playthrough, and that choice changed the ending from a nothing but awful ending to a mostly optimistic one. It changed from a breakup with Alex to the two of you being nearly synced up. Your family and internet friend were more actively supportive than the first playthrough, though the mother is actually a little more passive-aggressive this go-around. And you finally found a therapist and good medication from just one simple choice. And that right there is why I hate multiple endings. I feel like the story would have benefited if we kept to a more linear form, with a few choices to help or occasionally hinder your mental state. Also, and this may be a personal bias speaking, but I don't like the choice of making the game a text-adventure game. I feel like an interactive sim of some kind would have been more engaging, and just reading piles and piles of text wouldn't really be exciting for many. Also, a side note while editing this, it's just so freaking boring to edit footage that is almost nothing but text. I have spent so much fucking time just editing all of this. This is most of my editing time right here. It's just getting extremely bored just editing all of this. Just why I hate that. What is this? I guess those user reviews had a bit of a point, but the attempt was and still is commendable. Ultimately, it's just kind of a harmless endeavor. If you really want to try it out, it's free and it only lasts for about an hour, so you're not really losing much. It's also not bad enough to where harassment is a good idea. Seriously, you're all freaking disturbed and need help. There was another game that many consider to be one of the first games to tackle the subject, Actual Sunlight. The game was made by one Willow Neal, who when you enter the name on Google, you get some politician in California or a hockey player. Is this like a common name, or? I didn't see much of the controversy on this dude, which is good, because I really don't need another Gamergate level article to read. Now, the dude seems rather chill from interviews, despite his games certainly mirroring his experiences. Actual Sunlight takes control of Evan Winters, a self-profound writer that tends to spend his time going to bars and staying in bed, hitting the snooze button multiple times, which hits me hard to this day, man. Chocobo tries, though. He really, really tries. God damn it. Evan tends to be philosophical at times, whenever looking at his possessions to looking at some random dude on the train to work. I really like how Evan overanalyzes this dude's intentions and believes he's some kind of MLM salesman, only for him to warn Evan about his untied shoes. I can't lie, I've done that several times in my life, even after the person in question is long gone. Like, Yeah, that's relatable. Now, compared to Depression Quest, the choice to create a standalone character hits way more rather than a nameless blank slate. It's quite clear where Evan is going to end up. It ain't subtle in the slightest, but hey, when people go too far in the deep end, their desire to end it ain't exactly step by step. Dude, the entirety of Evan's time at work was mostly my time with some of my own jobs. Hell, even my current job at points, if I'm being real. And it's way easier to follow thanks to you actually seeing what's going on. Also gotta compliment the music. There's actually a bit of variety compared to Depression Quest, and all of it is way more pleasant in comparison. But another reason why I prefer Evan over the nameless DQ player, it's quite a simple one. With Evan being an actual character, it's way easier to find him relatable. He's generally kind-hearted and wants to help those who need it, while also being incredibly hostile towards himself. People around him are genuinely nice to him, except this asshole who just... awful. But none of them are quite friends of his, which is a bit of a complaint. This game does do random time skips, like Depression Quest, and like that game, it melds the overall world the characters are thrusted in. We don't get to learn about the coworkers and their struggles, well, mostly. I want to see Tori grow more winded. I want to hear more about Troy's home life and how it's getting weakened over time. I want to really learn about Evan and Jackie's relationship, which I'm sure was supposed to be romantic, but was only implied in text from one of Evan's fake book chapter monologues. Look, these were great in realizing Evan's character, but they also ruin what could be great character moments as well. In a similar vein, there are also times where you don't see certain characters, which really breaks the immersion drastically, even if it makes for a neat reveal that the therapist Evan was seeing was fake all along, even though I'd argue it would have been way more effective if we actually saw the illusion for ourselves. If you ask me, the story would have been way more engaging if the characters were more fleshed out outside of blank text, and maybe throw a few more areas and people to interact with, which would require the game to be much longer, I'm aware. Though I'm willing to admit that's just not what Will would have wanted in the first place. And I'm whining about things that shouldn't even be there to begin with. Similar to Depression Quest, as much as I'm not a fan of that execution, I know there are people who defend it, and that's fine. And it's not a bad game to look into if you're at all curious on the subject matter. Celeste is better, but that may be a bias talking.
I know I said I wasn't going to get into the Gamergate fiasco, but in order to get to this next game... oh boy.
Night in the Woods was made by Infinite Fall, founded by Scott Benson and Alec Hollica. Alec, however, was accused of being abusive by Zoe Quinn, and it pushed Infinite Fall to fire Alec, and he took his own life days later. Whether the accusations were true or not, what happened by the end of it was obviously not something anyone should be happy about. And the fact that Zoe got all the blame for it was purely unacceptable, no matter what side you're on. There were clearly some nuances about the whole thing, many we may never know about, and that's why I keep away from these kind of things. Because it's toxic to pick a side when it clearly doesn't revolve around us, and what happened between the two parties should be left to them. Harassment is never okay, white knighting is never okay. That level of parasocial involvement leaves people down a path that can hurt their entire future, and leaves their mental state in ruin. And that is ridiculous. With that said, I'm going to exit that soapbox and get into the topic of Night in the Woods. Now, I'm not sure how I was introduced to this game, but I remember it looking cute. Cute enough to put it on my Steam wishlist, but that's about it. I was honestly mixed on the whole deal. It was an explorative platformer, which I'm always down for, but it was more so a walking simulator otherwise, which is a genre I tend to steer away from. I love how the game tackles its themes through psychological horror elements, which as a Silent Hill fan is right up my alley. But the overall art direction was rather simple. Certainly plenty of tweening, which is never very appealing personally. But I have been planning to play this ever since I planned for this video, so mixed or not, I got it eventually anyway. You play as May, a black cat coming back from college, though her reasons for going home are led to be a mystery throughout the game. Though it's not like home is any better, as there are plenty of changes to the town that create some kind of tension between her parents, as well as her bandmates, Greg, Angus, and Bay. Speaking of though, I really don't like the rhythm sections, but you get berated when you screw up, which is so easy for me, or worse, give up entirely. Come on, that's just mean, man. Controller was a lot easier, though on the first session, I was forced to play on keyboard, since the game couldn't sense my Pro Controller for some reason. But even then, I wish they just told you in the form of directions instead. Hatsumiku and Space Channel 5 had spoiled me in this regard. But honestly, the art style and rhythm sections aside, I was pleasantly surprised with this one. Well, for the type of game I'm not usually into anyway. The story and characters were the real driving force, where you actually get to see what everyone is going through, with their own outlook on the town, relationship issues, housing issues, the whole gambit. And it all ties together with these dream sequences, which are not only the most eye-catching in terms of art design, but also drive home a sense of existential dread. Now, as someone who actually suffers with a lot of that shit, I should really hate these, and a few of them did trigger a few anxiety moments, but they still kept me engaged, and that's what really matters the most when a deep, compelling story is your primary focus. You know, I spent the most time on this game compared to the rest of the games. This game took me about 8 hours to complete, where the rest of the games tended to be less than 2. But that's because the world was far more expansive than the other games I played for this video. Not to say that's a jab at the other games at all. But I'm not going to go any farther. This game hits best when it is completely blind. It's all about the mystery and the individual moments that make the whole thing wonderful. And the last thing I want to do is ruin any of them for you. It's certainly the most expensive of the games in this video, but I can say with confidence that it's worth the purchase. Hell, I'd also fork some of it on the soundtrack. Some of these tunes are super relaxing, and some are just really damn catchy, preferably when they aren't being mangled by your twitchy fingers. Not sure if this is a one and done for me, since the overall game isn't my kind of thing in the first place, and the story isn't as powerful on a second visit, I'd assume, but that one playthrough was certainly worth my time, and I think it's going to be worth yours. Now, from one game that I've heard of that I actually enjoyed, we get to a game that I've heard of that might get me on a blacklist. I cannot begin to describe how much I've heard people praise Limbo. It looked kinda cool, got some great horror elements, but honestly that's kind of it. To talk about the game's story, well, there's not much. The environments do all the work, and it's all effective, with rogue children, dead children, bear traps that decapitates, and a giant spider that wants to impale you. Yeah, don't play this game if you're arachnophobic. As someone who has been pretty chill with the dudes nowadays, this thing still creeped me the fuck out. Not as much as the parasites, though. Nothing is more disturbing than being controlled by a separate entity, and this made me shiver every time it happened. It's a very depressing world, and it hits as apparently, according to the Steam page, you're looking for your sister, who may be assumed dead, and that does invoke some form of grief, or at the very least some sense of anxiety, especially with the set pieces. But with all that said, this game can get cryptic as hell, even get strict at points, as early as this one trap that killed me multiple times, and even as something as critical as this ledge grab. Damn you, you egg-legged demon! This one puzzle makes sense once you see the size difference on the pressure points, but you probably won't know that on the first go. I certainly didn't. Certainly glad this game doesn't have lives, otherwise I'd call bullshit. At least seeing these little shits die to them was pretty cathartic. These chapters in general remind me of the Lord of the Flies, and it's certainly unsettling conceptually. And as gorgeous as the game is, the monochrome landscapes tend to blend crucial elements that kind of bring in some cheap deaths, and even makes progression a little awkward. Like this chapter where you have to take this box to an elevator, raise the elevator, leave the box, click this lever, and never reach the rope. I know how to do it in hindsight, but honestly, I think I didn't see the answer only because I just got so numb to playing the game. And I can't say it lived up to the hype because of it. Sorry to every Limbo fan out there, but this game is kind of whatever. It's got its moments of brilliance, but you'd probably get more out of watching it than playing it. And with that said, I'm moving on. No, I'm not playing Inside. This was enough. And now for a bit of mood whiplash. This is actually a Flash game made by the brilliant Ed McMillan. Yeah, creator of these games if you are curious. It was also made by Tyler Glale, a common partner with McMillan. Since this was originally a Flash game, I wasn't actually going to put this in the video originally, but since it's included in this nifty little basement collection McMillan created, it's prime to talk about. And you know, you wouldn't think a game as cute as heck like this would never tackle such a sensitive subject. And then you realize this is the same dude that made fun of the Bible and psychotic Christians. I would argue the bright colors actually complement the tone, since the NPCs you run into are either cynical as fuck or just assholes. For eating your family, dude, show a little bit of empathy. The point of the game is to remove whatever problem the planet is suffering from shit-talking moons to whatever these crystals are doing. I don't know what we're doing here. You also get these moons that are creating methane. I didn't know moons can do that. I'm actually kind of terrified right now. There's not a lot to say about it. It's just visit the planets and blow up the only planet that has nobody worth living on, aka Earth. Again, global warming has taken its course because of us fucking humans, so why not take it all down? Aether is a strange game. I can tell it's one of McMiller's smaller projects. Just play it for 15 minutes and you kinda understand the gist of it. But it's decent. It's certainly worth the price as the Basement Collection is only $4, with less than 20 games included. It's a nice little package if you're interested. Now let's get back down to earth again, and actually end the video with a little obscure title, and one that's more of a technicality. An Aspie Life. Oh, for God's sake, could you people get a little poetic with your damn titles? Whatever, anyway. If the title didn't clue you in, the game is all about a guy who lives with Asperger's, or high-functioning autism, if we want to be current. I'm okay with either, personally. The dude in question is Thales, just some dude in an apartment complex, plays video games, has $18 in his hand for groceries, the broke bastard. And like I said, the dude has Asperger's. And damn it, that's all you're gonna know, at least until the ending bits. He also has a roommate who just upped and left for some reason. That plot device just kinda nopes out of there pretty quick. Now you may be asking why I'm talking about this game in a video about anxiety and depression, and that's actually a common thing for Aspies. People with autism tend to struggle with social cues, especially in their late teens and early 20s, which leads to them overthinking about small mistakes and overreacting to things that don't really matter to the vast majority. If I can give a nice little compliment, the mechanics do incorporate how Aspies do interact, on the average of course, with the majority of the game being just interactions and typing a word or two to get the right reaction. The only complaint I have is that most interactions will result in only a couple of responses. Yes, no, and in the case of running into assholes, fuck off. But I hope you like the interactions. That's about 85% of the game, with you going from your apartment, the grocery store, and the arcade, and that's about it. I mixed on the detail with Thales reacting to the sounds, which is another tick, but it doesn't add much. You hold or tap the down key and you don't really have to worry about it. It seems to just exist for the sake of it, which isn't much of a complaint, it's just a little observation. Same with the lack of eye contact. It may be cosmetic as far as I'm aware. I'm actually kind of a fan of the cutscene graphics. Kinda reminds me of Flashback looking at it. The overworld sprite for Thales is a bit more questionable, looking more like a laid-back lemming. And I think everyone else is in shadow, not because he's not trying to make eye contact, but instead just kinda hides the imperfections a little bit. The main music piece is a little on the grating side, but the arcade pieces aren't too bad on the ears. And the ending piece was actually pretty nice. Oh yeah, speaking of which, the other big part involves this girl that we bump into twice. After a few incidences, we learn that Thales and the girl Aislinn were old childhood acquaintances. Which leads to the best part of the game if you ask me. Shame it ends after that. Kinda wish there were a few more days to go through. Maybe if I got a few more collectibles or did something different, maybe I'd get something a little more worthwhile. But I guess that doesn't really matter in the end. I guess the short length can be good for replayability, giving you ample opportunities to get different endings, though the game isn't strong enough for me to feel compelled to do so. The game did get a big update a couple months ago, long after the release and a couple of sparse updates, so it shows the dude cares about the project. And there was DLC planned for it, but it got so big that it's actually getting a full release, which is kinda cool. Goes from a standard life sim to an action RPG, with Aislinn and another girl being party members. Still not a big fan of the name, but for the most part, it looks quite solid. Here's hoping it comes out great, because I do enjoy the idea of these characters, but a little more would be appreciated, and there's promise in this little prequel. Also, why is the game at the end not split screen? And that's going to be it for today. I wanted to get some other games like Omari into this video, but I wanted to keep things short for the time being. But if there's any other game that I missed, please, I encourage you to leave them in the comments below. It is very crucial that we keep discussing this topic, and with the world as it is right now, I think it is important that we keep reminding ourselves that there are people that are struggling, and if there is anyone that you know that is actually struggling right now, I heavily encourage that you just give them a helping hand. I'm sure they're going to appreciate that. I completely butchered that, but I'm taking that take.